part, I just want to really emphasize this question of how all of these things that are now proposed by different people who want to try and overcome these limits, they're always ultimately attacking symptoms, but never this root problem. You've heard talk about returning to the gold standard. As I said, you've heard campaigns like Positive Money talk about democratizing the banks. But what they forget really is that bank lending isn't just out of control because of greedy bankers, but is in response to the demands of capitalism, the insatiable demands of capitalism to find bigger and bigger markets. And the fact that there's a lack of investment in real production is because of the crisis of overproduction. It's because of the crisis of capitalism. And you can't bring that under control by some sort of abstract idea of democratizing the banks and taking money creation out of their power. And on the other side, we get to the question of these cryptocurrencies, people like Bitcoin, for example, which are a kind of anarcho-libertarian response to the fact that at the moment, the state and the central banks that are part of the state ultimately have all the power in terms of money creation. And it's no surprise that when you've had things like quantitative easing that have massively increased the money supply, there is a certain fear about the fact that the government can just print money as it likes. And hence the creation of things like Bitcoin. They're an attempt to basically distribute the money supply. And so what you have really, in summary, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, instead of having one kind of centralized system of money creation and one copy of all the transactions that are going on in the central bank, instead that's distributed. It's a distributed ledger, it's called, electronically distributed, digitally distributed in something called the blockchain. And new money, new cryptocurrency is created by people called miners who perform calculations and update the blockchain. And Bitcoin has actually arisen, and Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have led to multiple problems. First off, that question of mining is actually a huge problem. Mining real resources damages the environment. Well, mining cryptocurrency does too, because it actually creates it's an enormous amount of energy and electricity goes into creating new Bitcoin. And it's mainly focused now in places like China where electricity is very cheap, and you've got huge amounts of terawatts being produced or being used just to kind of mine this digital currency that isn't really then used for anything other than buying off the Silk Road and things like that, for all these kind of illegal produce. And the fact that that's what Bitcoin's really limited to is these kind of fringe economic activities means it can never really play the role of a genuine currency. It doesn't have any real economic anchor, and instead Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have just become a vehicle for speculation. In other words, people buy them just in the hope that their price is going to go up and they can sell them later. It's no fundamentally different from things like the tulip bulb craze, where I can't remember which century it was in Holland. People bought tulip bulbs just because they would hope that they would get more and more expensive. And that's really the definition of speculation. But the fact that you've got all this speculation, the prices go up and down daily, so volatile, makes it very difficult to use as money. The fact that if you were in a shop and you had your things priced in Bitcoin, you'd be having to go around constantly changing your prices every day and every hour even, because of the volatility of the currency. So it doesn't really play a viable role, because you do kind of need, and under capitalism particularly, you kind of need that trust, if you like, that the state creates in the money system. And really the problem isn't the meddling of the central banks, but it's the anarchy of the capitalist system. And things like Bitcoin under capitalism will always be a kind of utopian experiment. So really the question has to be how, if you want to get rid of the kind of evils of money, if money is the root of all evil, and how do you get rid of it? Well, it's to get rid of obviously the disease itself that underlies all these pernicious symptoms. But money can't be just abolished. It can't just be waved away. As I said, it historically rises because of certain material conditions, because of commodity production and exchange. And that in turn is tied to the question of private ownership. Money represents value, and value arises out of private property and production for exchange. To get rid of money then, really, as I said, you need to go back to what Marx said. You need to solve that. If you want to get rid of the money fetish, you need to get rid of the commodity fetish. You need to get rid of the system of commodity production and exchange. And that means going back to a kind of communist society, but on a much higher level, where we've got the tools and the technology and the wealth for superabundance. But money even then will not just be abolished, but it will wither away, was what Marx and Engels and Lenin analysed. Like the state, like class society, these things will wither away over time. There will be a certain transitional period from socialism, the lower form of communism, to the higher stage of communism, which begin with the working class seizing power, with the working class taking the key levers of the economy into common ownership under a democratic socialist plan of production. And as more and more of the economy is integrated into a socialist plan, less and less will be commodity production exchange, and less will there be need for money. All the products of labour will be socially owned, and they will cease to be commodities. And in fact, you can already see how this might play out under capitalism. You know, we have a system like the NHS, for example, where you don't walk in and have to pay any money, apart from for certain things. But the point is that why not, if you had that same principle expanded to food, to housing, to transport, why could you not take one sector after another out of this system of commodity production exchange, out of the market, and with it reduce the need for any monetary interactions? And in fact, Trotsky analysed this by talking about how at the end of the day we all receive kind of two wages. We receive an actual income for our work, a wage, but you also have a social wage, the wage that you never see because of the social services, the public services that are provided within the state and so forth. And the whole point of the transition from socialism to communism would be to decrease the actual money wage and increase the social wage over time until eventually there was no actual physical wage that you saw at all. And money itself would just become kind of mere tokens entitling us to a share of the common pot, basically. And it would be kind of like rationing in the Second World War, only on a much higher level. Rationing was because of scarcity, and people were given tokens entitling them to a certain amount of fruit and bread and so forth. But now imagine that on a much higher level, where there's superabundance, where it's not rationing, but rather it's just saying if you work, if you're a member of society, then you can take from the common pot. And eventually we'll have a system where all scarcity is eliminated. The need for tokens themselves will be eliminated. We can just walk into the shops that are around, take what we need, full in the knowledge that tomorrow that will be replaced. And we'll have effectively Marx's maxim that said, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. Now I just want to leave this discussion, leave the final word to Leon Trotsky, the Russian Revolution, who said, "Money cannot arbitrarily be abolished. It must exhaust its historic mission, evaporate and fall away. The death blow to money fetishism will be struck only upon that stage when the steady growth of social wealth has made us bipeds forget our miserly attitude towards every excess minute of labour, our humiliating fear about the size of our ration. Having lost its ability to bring happiness or trample men in the dust, money will turn into mere bookkeeping receipts for the convenience of statisticians and for planning purposes. In the still more distant future, probably these receipts will not be needed either, but we can leave this question entirely to posterity, who will be more intelligent than we are." And that's what we're fighting for.